Well, yeah, we'll live here, then we go.
I'm on. Hey, good morning, folks. Thank you for coming back after coffee and donuts and all the other goodies we had. This is really a pleasure for me to introduce this guy that's going to come up here and talk with you. John Noltner, who is the founder of A Piece of My Mind. For the past week, I'm not going to give you the background because I'm pretty sure John's going to give you a lot of that anyways. For the past week has been up here working with high school youth and community members, getting pictures and stories to answer the question, what legacy do you hope to leave for this school or community? And we ended up with 79 individuals that stepped forward to do their stories. And for me, it has been a tremendous week of so much insight into what our community is like, especially our youth community at the high school and our youth community here. We had at least 4 of our youth that stepped up and said, I'd like to be in this. And what John does is he does a picture and then they write a story about the question we asked. Again, the question was, what legacy do you hope to leave for this school or community? And I want to read one thing. John doesn't know I have this on here, but I got this from a parent last night. Last night, we presented on the side of the county courthouse for like 3.5 hours. Yes, in the storm. Luckily, Jason Anderson brought a fish house that John could hang out in with the projector. But we were there and we probably had 60 or so people come through, which was really cool. A lot of people just coming up in their cars and pulling in and watching it for a while. The entire video is 20 minutes long. Sorry, I've been told that the video doesn't want to transfer or work on our pro presenter stuff, so you won't get to see the kids. But if this congregation is interested, I will happily on any other day come up here and we can set up a projector through my laptop or whatever, and we can watch the Grand Rapids thing anytime you folks would like to. I'll be willing to come in and do that, so because I think it's a really cool thing, so please be aware of that. But John, I wanted to share this with you. We had one parent there last night, and I stopped at their car because I know him, and she says, as a parent, you captured a part of my child that she keeps hidden from the world. If that is not a cool statement to what you were able to draw out of people, what the kids stepped up and said, these are their words, folks. It's not something that John recrafted. It's not something that I did. It was simply, guys, share your story on what you want your legacy to be. And I wish you could see the video, but I'm going to turn over to John, and at some point we will do that video up here. That's my promise to you guys, because I think we all deserve to see it, and it is so moving. So we'll see what we get today.
Yeah, we'll see.
John Noltner.
Good morning. Thanks for coming. I mean, maybe it's just you don't want to go back out in the snow. I don't know, but thanks for being here. Yeah, there we go. So also, I don't have a remote, so every time it's time to advance the slide, I'm just going to say beep, and then they'll advance the slide back there. But I didn't actually beep yet. That wasn't a real beep. Yeah, I want to start by saying that I'm not. I'm ELC at Lutheran. That's my tradition. I'm not a theologian. I can't quote a lot of scriptures. I probably couldn't recite all 10 commandments right now, although I have the gist of them up here. But I am drawn over and over to Jesus' call to love one another and what that means in the world today. And I've looked for the loopholes and I've looked for the exceptions, and I don't think they exist. It doesn't say love the ones that look like you, and doesn't say love the ones that live like you. It doesn't even say love the ones that voted like you in the last election cycle. It says love one another, period. And that's where this project begins. And so what I want to do today is take you on a little journey of this storytelling project called A Piece of My Mind. Something I've been working on for about the last 15 years. And then talk a little bit about what I saw with the students in the last week that I've been here. There it is. You know, where we talked about this idea of what kind of legacy do you want to leave? How do you want people to think about you? What do you want people to know when they think of your name? And so all week over there, we have one of my exhibits set up over at the Rife Center, and there was a little bit of it down at the YMCA. Did anybody see any of that? Oh, okay, so you saw some of it. On Monday, we ran 500 students through that. Go ahead and advance again. You know, I did a little introductory talk, a shortened version of what this is. Then we went out to the exhibit. Go ahead and advance. Walked them through a few panels so they understood the methodology of this project. Go ahead. And then I did this studio process where we ask them to write their answer in 25 words or less. We do a black and white portrait. And in the couple of days that we did this, yeah, we got the 79 responses. And as an artist, it's moderately horrifying to show up with nothing but an invitation and hope that people will participate. But it has never not worked. Like everywhere we go, we work with veterans around trauma and suicide prevention. We work with middle schoolers around anti-bullying and faith communities about when they found unexpected courage. And it always works, which doesn't mean I don't freak out a little bit at the start of everyone. Go, oh, hope it works again. Go ahead and advance. And then this was our practice. This is what it looked like on the side of the courthouse. This was a different question, different person, but it was a slide I had as we were practicing and making sure it would work on the side. It's a fun process. All right, go ahead and ask that question, what do you want to leave? What legacy do you want to leave? Go ahead. So I'll back up a little bit and I'll tell you a little bit about my background so you understand where this comes from and why it started. I've spent my career as a freelance photographer. Shooting for national magazines and Fortune 500 companies. Next. I've had the good luck of shooting travel photography across the United States and around the world. Go ahead again. And maybe one more, just a little eye candy. And one more. And in the process, I've come to realize that it's my job to find beauty in unexpected places. That people actually hire me to see good where others might struggle to recognize it. Next, and that doesn't mean that we ignore the challenges of the world. You know, the world is filled with challenges, and I think it's important that we address those challenges honestly and directly. But this is where my faith comes in. I also think it's really imperative that we approach those challenges with a grace and a hope and a belief that something better is possible. As a freelance photographer, you're always making choices about the jobs you'll accept in the world. Does it square up with my worldview? Does it support certain ideas I believe in? Does it pay enough to justify being away from my family for a certain length of time? And at our house, we've embraced this saying, go ahead, that some jobs feed the belly. You know how that ends? Next. And some jobs feed the soul. And when you're really lucky, your job can do both. right? And back when I started this project 15 years ago, there were two things going on in my life. First is that my soul was getting hungry. I was frustrated with the quality of our national dialogue. Hasn't gotten better. But I was worried about all the things that ask us to look at what separate us: politics, ethnicity, religion, gender, class, you name it. If you choose to go through life dividing, you've got all sorts of tools at your disposal. But I wondered if there was something I could do with my skill set, with my photography and storytelling instead, to remember what connects us. So that's the first thing that was going on. The second thing, I like to say the economy handed me some free time, if you know what I mean. Maybe it happened to some of you too. The recession hit the world of freelance photography hard and fast, and my workload dropped quickly and dramatically. And if I was a better business person, I might have used that time to look for new clients. But not every decision we make is based in dollars and cents. There are other ways that we can measure our success in the world. And so, like I said, my soul was getting hungry, and this is how I decided to feed it. Next. And I started playing around with this question: what does peace mean to you? Because most people that I met in my travels would welcome a little bit more peace into their lives. Their immediate family, or their neighborhood, or the bigger world. Even my friends who served in the US military, I think, would rather stay home with their families whenever possible. But here's the interesting thing about this idea of peace, is that we say we want it, but we're not very good at getting it. I mean, we talked about it in the sermon, this idea of peace. We say we want it, but we're not very good at making it. So you might have a high school student that'll flash the peace sign while they walk down the hallway and frame up their selfie, and then they'll form into cliques and they'll bully their own classmate. You know, you'll have peace activists on the street with a sign that says "Give peace a chance," but they can't get along with their immediate family members. My church in Bloomington, Minnesota is called Peace Lutheran Church, ironically enough. And you'll see in my church people nodding up and down on Sunday morning while they listen to the story of the Good Samaritan. Right? Story of helping somebody out in need, no matter who it is. And Monday they'll walk right by someone in need like it's not their problem. And that's not a critique of my church. That's a critique of the human condition, because it happens all the time. There's a disconnect between what we say we value and how we live our day-to-day lives. So I just started building these conversations, sitting down with people from all different backgrounds and asking them, what does peace mean to you? How do you work towards it in your life? What are some of the obstacles you encounter along the way? Go ahead to the next one. And, you know, some of these folks had marched with Dr. King back in the day. Some were Holocaust survivors or returning veterans or people who've been through the prison system or had a terminal diagnosis. This really broad cross-section of who we are as human beings. And when we were in conversation, it was not my job to correct them or convince them of something else or tell them why they're wrong or why I'm right or how they ought to think about anything. It was my job just to listen, to sort of sit in that space and understand what was going on in those people's lives. Next. So as, oh no, what's his name? Oh no. Something Duncan. Duncan Gray. Oh, there it is. Oof. There's a lot of names in my brain. So, you know, I got to, as I was traveling, got to meet all of these people. And sometimes, you know, A Piece of My Mind is not a project about faith, but there's a lot of faith in it. Because that's what moves people's hearts. That's what shows them how they should live in the world. So Duncan Gray was in Oxford, Mississippi. That's where the University of Mississippi is. James Meredith was the first black man to be able to attend University of Mississippi, and there were protests. There were a lot of people that didn't want him going there, and there were 50,000 people that showed up to protest it. I think it was like 15,000 National Guard troops to try to keep a lid on things. And Duncan Gray's dad was the pastor in town who talked a lot about love, and he was trying to help keep these tensions down so that things wouldn't get out of hand there. And Duncan does that same work now in the same church where his dad used to work. And he said, is there a way that we can find to celebrate the good in our past and redeem the bad? You know, stuff happened, right? There are difficult things in our history. And is there a way we can celebrate what's good, but also work to redeem what was bad about it? Next. I got to meet people like Panina Bowman in Atlanta, Georgia, and she's Jewish, and she talked about growing up as a young girl in World War II Europe. And she said one day soldiers showed up at their door and said, you got about 10 minutes to pack and then you got to go. And they didn't know where they were going to go, but they wound up getting on a train and they went to Auschwitz. And so both of Panina's parents and 42 other members of her family died at Auschwitz. And she talked about how difficult it was to find anything that resembled peace in a place like that. But she said when she was there, she also made a choice not to hate. She said, hate would have come easy. She said, but hate's a really powerful weapon and it's intended to destroy somebody else, but in fact that circles back and it destroys you instead. Next. And in New York, I got to meet Simranjit Singh. And Simran is Sikh. He said, especially after 9/11, when he was a young kid, people would look at the Sikh community and they thought, oh, they must be Muslim. And there was a lot of hate that came out at the Sikh community, even though they had nothing to do with it. And Simran said that he remembered when he was in his teens after 9/11 how hard that was, and that they were getting, death threats and they were getting threatening phone calls, and it was really uncomfortable. And he said, but also they had neighbors showing up at their door who said, do you need anything? Like, can we go to the grocery store for you so you don't have to go out? Let's bring you food. Let's make sure you're okay. And he said that he remembered what his dad said, which is that there's a lot of ugliness in the world, but there's always, always more love. When I start my interviews, I always start out by asking people, if I didn't know anything about you, what would you want me to know? And Simran thought about that question for a minute, and he goes, I like basketball. I'm like, really? That's what you're going to go with? You like basketball? And he goes, yeah. He said, people look at my turban and my dark skin and my beard, they assume that I don't know anything about American sports. He said, I love it. The Spurs is my team. Spurs? Is that a basketball team? Okay, I'm not. I'm like, oh, did I just say something really stupid? No, I think it was the Spurs was his team. But he said he loves to challenge people's expectations, to sit with them and be patient with them and help them understand who he is in a new way. One more, I think. Oh, okay. And then when I was in DC, I met Rose Berger. And Rose works for a group called Sojourners. If you've heard of it, Jim Wallace started it. It's focused on faith and justice issues. And Rose is one of the editors for Sojourners magazine. And she, when I interviewed her, had just come back from Ukraine. And she was there on an interfaith prayer delegation to go with an interfaith group and pray for peace. And she's done this before. She's been in Northern Ireland during their troubles. She was in Chad during their civil war. And she said she and her partner had a conversation and said, it's probably worth it to take a small risk to go there and pray for peace. And I said, okay, Rose, that's fine, but I have to tell you, some of the people I know might think that's a big risk. If you went to Kyiv, you're in the middle of a war zone. That's kind of a big risk. And she said, yeah, she said, but I've realized that things look scarier from far away. She said that if you're reading about headlines over there, it sounds like one thing, but if you get on the ground with people, you figure out ways that you can navigate this stuff. She said, I live in Washington, D.C. I have people who wouldn't come to my neighborhood for 30 years because they thought it was too scary. She said, but when you live in it, it looks like a different thing. And I thought that was so interesting. Things look scarier from far away. What's next? Now I don't remember what I put. Oh, okay. So I've been working on this project for a long time, and during the pandemic, my wife and I sort of upped the ante. I had done a lot of programming. I had exhibits and books, and we did programming around the country. And with the pandemic, it all shut down. And my wife Karen, who's a smart woman, said, "Well, can't you still do interviews?" I'm like, "Oh, maybe." And so this is where we raised our kids, but they had grown, and I was not interested in ever raking those leaves again. So we sold our house, next, and we got rid of all of our stuff, next, and we hit the road. We bought a van. His name is Vinny, Vinny Van Gogh. Get it? Yeah, moderately dorky. But we hit the road and we traveled the country to gather new stories. For 2.5 years, It's 900 days. I think Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days. We went for 900 days and drove 93,000 miles across the country. Go ahead, next. And just a little eye candy again. Sometimes our backyard looked like this. Next. Sometimes it looked more like that. Next. Or that. One more. Or that. I actually had the hardest time explaining to people I was still working. I went and got my hair cut when we were on the road, and the woman said, "Oh man, it must be nice to be retired like you." I'm like, no, I'm not retired. I'm still working. I'm interviewing people, I'm photographing, I'm trying to do this stuff. And she goes, "Oh, neat. I wonder what I'll do when I'm retired like you." I'm like, not listening, but that's okay. Next. But my work looked different. Some days my office looked like that. Next. Some days it looked like that. Again. Sometimes the commute went from bad, next, to worse. And sometimes the traffic was ridiculous. Karen was driving. She said, "What should I do?" I said, "I think you should stop." It was the first day that they had opened the roads in Yellowstone to vehicle traffic. They forgot to tell the buffalo. All right, next. And so we got to see a lot of beautiful scenery. There's amazing stuff in our country, and I love it. I've been to 49 of our states. I've not yet been to Hawaii. But more than that, there are amazing people. You know, I'm convinced that there's beauty and wisdom all around us if we'll take the time to see it. And sometimes in really unexpected places. So on this trip, we very intentionally went to some uncomfortable places. We went to the border to talk about immigration. We went to Mississippi to talk about Confederate monuments. We went to Skid Row to talk about housing security. Taking Rose Berger's advice to heart, things look scarier from far away. If you're in proximity and close to those places, close to the people who are impacted by those issues, you start to see them in new ways. What's next? Let's see what's next. Oh, okay. Yeah, so we shared these stories as books. Go ahead. That's our latest one. This is about the 2.5 years on the road. It just won the Minnesota Book Award, which we were excited about. Next. And then we've got these exhibits. Some of you saw one of them. We've got 5 of them that go around the country to colleges and community centers and faith communities, not to tell people the secret meaning of peace and not to tell people how to think about this issue or that issue, but to engage people in conversation, to help people understand that if there are problems in the world, and there are, these are our problems, right? If there are going to be solutions in the world, and I think that there are, they're going to have to be our solutions, to engage people in that process. Go ahead to the next one. And then we started doing this studio process. And I'll show you what a few of these look like. Go ahead to the next one. We've done this question a couple of times in faith communities, asking how is your faith giving you courage? And I'll show you a couple of examples. Go ahead. I had completely lost faith and hope on the darkest day of my life in Iraq. Lying lifeless on the floor, God lifted me up to face my soldiers and to lead again. Next. Showing up as my authentic self in church spaces has often been discouraged. Because of my faith, I can boldly show up as my authentic self in every space I enter. Next. I have faith that people need love, not punishment. Jesus had a way of living in this light that gives me courage as a parent and a teacher. I think I have a lot of examples. Go ahead and hit it. Go a couple more. One more. There we go. My faith trusts me to find what I believe, to change what I believe, to welcome all beings and search for truth with an open mind. Next. Coming out as a queer pastor taught me that courage is not a quality I can inhabit without a community around me and within me that trusts the image of God, or that the image of God is in every person, without exception. You know, we figured out that if you ask a question and people feel like you're listening, feel like they're being heard, they'll share some really powerful stuff. My job is just to be there and listen. Next. Oh, and there are some things in life. This was with an interfaith group. So this is Pardeep Kaleka, who's Sikh. There are some things in life that will break your heart but fix your vision. My Sikh faith gives me the courage of sight. I don't know if you remember, in 2012, there was a shooting at a Sikh temple down in Milwaukee. I think 5 or 6, 7 people maybe died. Pardeep's dad was the head of that temple and died that day. And Pardeep went on to do this really interesting anti-hate work. He does this anti-hate work most often with a guy named Arno Michaelis, who's a reformed white supremacist who had started the group that the shooter had come from. And so Arno felt some obligation to create some healing there. So now I know both Pardeep and Arno, and it's pretty fun to see the work that they do in the world. Go ahead to the next one. We worked with, I didn't know I put these in here. In Minneapolis, I've done like 8 different presentations in the last few days, and I've tried to mix it up so I'm not saying the same thing every time. I'm from Minneapolis, and so when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, that was about 11.6 miles north of my house. And I thought, if I've got a storytelling project about listening to other people, no matter who they are, no matter what's going on, I should just go there. So every day for the first week, I went to that intersection and just asked the question, what do you want to say? Let's see what this woman said: stop pinning the acts of one person on an entire race. Next. I don't care who you are or what you look like. You don't have the right to hurt anybody. Next. She said, I want justice and I want to be a part of the solution. I'm here to show solidarity and pick up the pieces. What I thought was interesting about that is, and I don't know what the news looked like up here, but in Minneapolis there was a lot of footage of burning buildings and frustrated people out on the streets, and that was all true, right? But what was also true is that every morning when I went out on the streets, there were literally thousands of people there who were sweeping up glass and boarding up buildings and making sure that people around them were safe and that they had the food that they needed. And I think it's really important when we see a particular narrative on the news, or we see, hear a particular line of reasoning, that we always ask ourselves, what else is true? What else is going on in that place? All right, let's see the next one. What else did it? Oh, okay. So in Minneapolis, a lot of times I'll share these in a talk after George Floyd was shot. There's still the pandemic, so we couldn't do that. But I found this church north of there that had this big blank wall I'd been looking at for years, going, I wonder what I could do with that big blank wall there. And I thought that they would. I asked them if I could project, and I thought that they would have a elevator or a staircase going to that low roof. They didn't, so I got a rickety extension ladder and I climbed up on that low roof, tied a rope to my gear and hauled it up there, and every night for 10 nights at the end of the summer we projected those community stories just as a way to say, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. I think it's one of the most powerful things we can do for one another, and it costs us almost nothing. Next. Yeah, we've done that sort of projection other places. This was at a thing called Art Prize. The question there was, when have you found unexpected courage? This woman said, at the height of the abuse I endured, I suddenly found my voice. It's amazing to me the poetry that people will bring to it and the stories that they can tell in just 25 words or less. Next. In North Minneapolis, we did a community series about finding strength in the midst of struggle. Next. In New York Mills over by Fergus, they had a grain bin downtown, so we projected onto the side of the grain bin, which was pretty fun. Next. There's one more example, and go ahead to the next one. And then in Minneapolis, in the Phillips neighborhood, there's an ELCA church there. Was primarily Scandinavian, but the demographics of the area have shifted, and it's now mostly, at least half Hispanic. They do their services bilingual. It's actually one of the ELCA churches that's still growing in the world, which is not the most common thing. We did a series on belonging with them, and we printed some of the portraits 12 feet high. Go ahead to the next one. And we put them on the outside of the church so that they could see the community could see that they belong there too, no matter where they came from. So pretty fun. Next. And then one more series. I think I mentioned before, we work with veterans around PTSD and suicide prevention, and we just ask people, what have you learned? Go ahead. Trauma doesn't define you. You may feel lost and alone, but you're not broken. If you're alive, hope lives, and healing can follow. Next. Brian's suicide didn't stop his pain. It just gave a piece of it to everyone who knew and loved him. Next. And Joe said, if suicide seems like the only answer, then you're asking the wrong question. I've learned to enjoy life again. I should say I'm not a vet, but I have a heart for vets and what we ask them to do and the way they get wounded in the process. And when I was introducing this project at this retreat, afterwards Joe came up to me, and Joe's a little bigger than me, and he stood about here, and I won't use his exact words, but he said, I don't know what sort of art stuff you're doing. He didn't say stuff, but I want nothing to do with it. I'm like, that's okay, but if you change your mind, I'll be here. And at the last hour of the last day, he came up and said, I do have something to say. And he said that. And then at their evening banquet, just before everybody went home, I played a video that had their stories in it. And Joe came up afterwards and gave me a bear hug I thought was going to crush me. And he said, thanks for listening to our stories. You know, again, I think we all carry wounds with us. We all have stuff that we want to share and we want to say, and we don't often have that space to see it or to say it. And so having that chance to say it, but then being able to see what your peers are saying and sort of understand that you're not doing this thing alone, like we're all in this thing together, is a really powerful experience. What's next? Oh yeah. And this is where we would play for you the video of the stories from Grand Rapids if that video would work on this system. So I'm sorry we don't have that, but I hope that Jim will be able to play that for you sometime. But you know, that story that Jim shared of the mother that said, boy, my kid shared something that I never even knew about. Or the teachers that said, whoa, I've been working with this kid for years and I didn't know that. That ability to see ourselves in new ways. You know, sometimes our day-to-day lives get so busy, we just sort of skip along the surface. And that opportunity for people to sink down and find their better angels and share their aspirational thoughts. There's a lot of power in that and how we can start to see each other differently. Go ahead to the next one. Oh, that's the video. Go ahead again. There we go. I want to close, I think we're okay time-wise, yeah. I just want to close with a few more lessons. You know, these long-form stories that I've done thousands of, or hundreds of them, and these short-form stories I've done thousands of, and people have asked me what I've learned along the way. And sometimes that's a hard thing to answer because there's all of these little beautiful bits of wisdom, but there are themes that have bubbled up, and I've come to call them my lessons on the road to peace. And I just want to close with a few of those. Like I said, we've gone hard places. I have this methodology of building peace signs wherever we go. I went on Friday, I went ice fishing with Jason Anderson and scratched the little peace sign into the crusty snow. And it's just, you know, along the border, I use whatever I find, and here there was some leftover scraps of concertina wire, and I built a peace sign, not because it's going to change what's going on down at the border, but so that it doesn't change me. You know, so it's a commitment to acknowledge the pain of the world, and an effort to try to do something to create healing in the world. Go to the next one. And one more. And so this is Pancho, who is a street nurse. And I had crossed the border. I was in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico this day, and I met Pancho. And he's trained as an EMT. He's got a donated ambulance, and he circulates south of the border in communities of asylum seekers, folks who are waiting on that side of the border for their asylum hearing. And he looks for people who are in medical distress. If it's, you know, a diabetic issue, or if it's respiratory struggle, whatever it is, he's got the skills that he can help these people that probably don't have other resources. And Pancho said that he realizes that he's not going to be able to change the policy, and he's not going to be able to change their situation. His goal is just to change their moment. You know, whatever difficult thing they're going through, just try to help with that. And I think about that for us. You know, some of the problems of the world feel pretty big. I know that they feel bigger than the solutions I bring to the table. But what if the people we encounter, we could do something to change their moment? Just shift that day a little bit. Next. Yeah, we went down to Skid Row to talk about housing security. Los Angeles neighborhood, 50 square blocks with over 8,000 people who are unhoused living there. Next. I love this little bit of graffiti. It's not how you fell down, it's how you get back up. I say that to my kids a lot of times if they're complaining about how things are difficult or things aren't going the way they want. I'm like, okay, but that's not the end of the story, right? Whatever's going on, what's next? Where can we go from here? How can we shift that? One more. And this is Kate Adair, and I didn't meet Kate on Skid Row. I met her a little further north in Corvallis, Oregon, but she'd been living on the streets for a long time. Her boyfriend had some substance use issues and some anger issues, so couldn't get into a shelter, and she wasn't going to leave him out on the street to be by himself. She said that they were each other's tenuous hold on humanity. They could make each other smile. They could make each other laugh. And this doesn't always happen, but a few years after I interviewed Kate, I got to go back to Corvallis. I'd lost touch with her, but she heard I was coming to town, working with the university, doing a series of stories on belonging. Turns out she broke up with her boyfriend. That's fine. But she walked in the door. She knew I was going to be there, and she came in and, oh, wait, I forgot to tell you. When I interviewed her the first time, she said, you know, really what she hoped for someday was to have a door that locked and to have a bathtub where she could relax and to have a kitchen where she could cook meals for her friends. So now a few years later, I'm back in Corvallis. She walks in the door with a great big smile on her face, and she goes, guess what? Oh, do you have a door that locks? She goes, uh-huh. And she said, and I have a bathtub in my house. She said, and last night I got to cook dinner in my kitchen for my friends that had them over. And I thought, man, sometimes these things seem so intractable, right? Sometimes these difficult situations seem so hopeless, but there is hope, and things can change, and miracles do happen. Next. I love mountains, which does not explain why I moved back to Minnesota after we were living on the road. But next, I got to interview Lori Schneider, who's a mountain climber. And she's climbed the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, summited each of them, all while being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Actually, so the first one she climbed before her diagnosis, she got to the top, she's like, I think I'm going to do this for 7 or 6 more big mountains. And then she got diagnosed and she thought, well, there goes my dream. But then she thought, oh, maybe I can still do it. And she had the sort of MS that would go into remission once in a while. And so every time it went into remission, she'd climb another mountain. And the last one she did was the biggest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, 29,035 feet. And she couldn't wait to see the view from the top of the world. And so she got up to the top of it, and the clouds had rolled in, and she couldn't even see her hand in front of her face. She's like, ah. But she thought, okay, I'll pull out my sat phone, and I can call my family and celebrate with them. So she dialed the phone, and it rang, and it rang, and it rolled into voicemail. She's like, seriously? And and a storm was coming in, so she had to head down. And on her way down, she said she realized that she didn't climb the mountain to see the view, and she didn't climb the mountain to call her family. She climbed it to prove to herself what she could still do. And sometimes our goals look a little different than we think they're going to look. And she's like 5'2" and about 105 pounds, and she said she gets on these climbing teams with these alpha men who look at her like she's going to be a liability. She's a woman, she's small, she's got a MS, she's just going to slow us down. And she said she knew that dynamic, and so she decided she was not only going to get herself to the top, but she was going to carry a piece of somebody else's equipment up with her just to prove that she could do it. She's a tough woman. All right, next one. This might be the last one. Yeah. So we were in Charleston, South Carolina, at Mother Emanuel Church. And if you remember, in 2015, Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, showed up on a Wednesday night and asked if he could come into Bible study, all black church. And they invited him in. They're like, yeah, come on in, have a seat, join us. And he sat with them for an hour in the basement of the church while they were talking about the Word of God. And at the end of the hour, when everybody bowed their heads to pray, he pulled out a gun and he shot and killed 9 people. Next. And so when I went there, I got to interview a guy named Lee Bennett. And Lee is one of the church historians at Mother Emanuel. And it's my Germanic upbringing. I think I tend to show up early for everything. Lee showed up at the normal time, like he should. But when I was waiting for him to show up, I was by those 3 doors up at the top. And I started feeling a little self-conscious. I'm like, oh, here I am, another white guy from up north. I got bags of equipment with me, asking to be welcomed in. That feels weird. And I knew I wanted to ask this question, but I knew I couldn't ask it right away. But at a certain point in the interview, I said, Lee, how is it that a person who looks like you can come to trust a person who looks like me after having that trust violated in such a horrific way? And he said, well, that's easy, John. He said, this isn't our house. He said, this is the Lord's house. And we're here to welcome and to serve and to love everybody who walks through the door. And he said, we can't possibly allow the bad acts of one person to change who we are as human beings. And I think about that grace and I think about that forgiveness. And I wonder what that would look like if we could wash that out across our world today. Next one. Pastor Paul talked about the light that can be the little bit of hope. That light that can sort of encourage us. Has anyone ever been to Holden Village? Oh, you have? Okay, so you know. Yeah, it's, oh, there you are back there. Why did I point over there? Sorry. Yeah, Holden Village. So we were up there, and it was when there were protests out in Charlottesville to keep a statue of Robert E. Lee standing, and then there were counter-protests. So Holden Village is a super remote place, right? There's no email, there's no phone. You go up there and you can sort of check out from the world, but sometimes the world sneaks in, right? Someone new shows up in the village and they brought a newspaper. And so we got the news while we were up there that, then there were counter-protesters to the protesters, and then one of the first group drove a car into the counter-protesters and killed Heather Heyer. Also that same week in Bloomington, where I live, someone threw a pipe bomb at a mosque. And nobody was hurt, but it could have been. And sitting in this remote place, we didn't quite know how to respond. So I'm like, well, after chapel, or Vespers, let's everybody get a bunch of candles and we'll go make a peace sign on the side of the mountain. And we thought we could gather and think about the light that we could bring into the room, into the world. And then at the end, carry that light down the mountain into a world that needed the light. You mentioned Dr. King's quote during the sermon that I'm really fond of. Now we'll see if you all were listening. Dr. King said, hatred can't drive out hatred, only what? Love can do that. And darkness can't drive out darkness, only what? Light can do that. The more I work on this project, the more I have the good luck of going around to towns like this and listening to stories of legacy and hope and connection and healing, the more convinced I am that you and I are the love, and that you and I are the light, and that we got a lot of work to do. Thank you.
this guy? Yeah. Actually, before questions, can I share? I frantically tried to copy some of the quotes the kids
Oh,
had.
okay.
So
You're gonna
if
read
you
a
guys are
couple?
okay, can I read a couple of what our youth? I think I might have a couple of community ones in here as well, and then yes, questions and answers for John. So one of our youth here, I won't mention her name, said, "I want to leave a legacy of abundant joy and empathy." Start already.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, jeez.
Turns out you're human.
Oh, jeez. Yep.
We call that watering the garden.
Well, we had one of those. Okay, come on. Go to the next one. Let me see what else I can find in here. St. Andrew's Youth, who we get to hang out with on Sundays, said, "Kindness costs you nothing, but it can still always be priceless." Words from our youth. Let's see what else I got. Sorry,
While you're looking, I'll just say, I said to some of these kids as they were coming through, if you all live up to this legacy you're talking about, we're going to be okay. It's going to be all right.
This is a kid that is not at either of our churches, but somebody I saw at school and said, "Hey, Asher, I want you in this." And he said, "Okay," and got his permission. And he said, don't judge those who are quiet or sit with the weirdos. I have a fear of feeling something, of feeling unloved and judged. Get to know me first before judging the cover of the book. Wow. That's enough for me. I am so amazed at what this community brought forward and said. And now, as a community, I want to make one more thing before I turn it back to you. You get to have the last word, though. That's the best part. Yep. We showed this Friday night at the Rife Center, and we did a Q&A after, and I actually got the question from one of the community members. "So, Jim, what are you going to do with this now?" And I was like, "Oh, well, this was my idea." But now, as I thought about that after, my answer should have been this. I don't know. What are we going to do with this now? Because it's not what Jim is going to do with this, it's what we as a community, whether it's a faith community, whether it's the entire community, whether it's the high school community. What are we going to do with this now? This is not a one and done thing. This can't be. If this touched you in any way, this is not a one and done type of event. This lives on through the voices that were in this piece. And we, as a community, need to figure out how to carry it on and move it forward. And now I'm going to go back to John, and I'm going to go back and sit.
All right. You guys got any questions? Thanks, Jim. Yeah.
Thank you. It's what an amazing thing that you're doing. And, but just on a common thing that happens quite often. You walk down the street, especially in bigger cities or even in other countries, you see panhandlers. Or you drive your car and come up to a stop sign or a stoplight, and you'll see people holding signs, homeless, giving you food. How do you react to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't always roll down my window and hand out money. We do give in other places that address homelessness and address hunger and things like that. But I also don't really look the other way. You know, I'll make eye contact, I'll, nod to the person, wave to the person, say something to them, and at least give them some human dignity. And I think, I don't know, people get that. I don't think I've ever gotten any sort of negative response from acknowledging the person and not giving them money. But I think, like, when I interviewed Kate Adair, who was homeless, she talked a lot about the frustration of knowing how people were looking at her and the frustration of feeling judged. And so I mean, my tendency is just to try to make at least some sort of human connection. And yeah, I can't give out a $20 bill to every, I mean, sometimes you're walking down the streets of New York city, you could go broke pretty fast, handing out a $20 bill to everybody who's asking for something. But I try to at least acknowledge some sort of humanity in it. That's what I do.
Well, if it's like a panhandler, you know, you could probably suggest some things to do to them, but if you're in a car at a stop and go light, you know, not much you can do, to them.
Yeah.
Try to encourage them or do something because.
Yeah, I mean,
you
just.
don't know what the story is.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to know what the story is, and it can feel overwhelming. But I don't think there's a poem I just read by. Well, I'm not going to remember her name, but we're not able to heal everything in the world, but we are called, I think, to reach out to mend those things that are within our reach. So what I think I saw later in the week, your church is going and working with Second Harvest, right? That's the thing. My wife works for Second Harvest. She does human resources for them, so that's a good organization. So I don't think it's possible to respond to every individual person, but there are ways that we can work on systems.
Yeah, I would think we could respond to a lot of that by thinking, hey, there's problems there, let's do something ourselves about it.
Yeah.
In a way we can.
Right. The word responsibility is pretty nice. It breaks into response and ability. So what's my ability to respond? And for me, storytelling is what I do. So my ability to respond is to try to use these stories to humanize some of these issues that we see in the headlines. Yeah, thanks for the question. I know it's not a fully satisfactory answer, but it's part of the process. What else? Yeah.
How do you, and whoever you're traveling with or doing all these events with, how do you kind of maintain your own level of balance and sanity just in that kind of rigorous schedule and interaction with intense situations?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it used to be that psychologists would talk about a thing called secondhand trauma. Now they just call it trauma. Right? Because if you spend your time, if you're a social worker and you're constantly in these situations that are really difficult, or if you're a parole officer and you're constantly dealing with difficult issues, that can take a toll eventually. So you have to figure out a way to take care of yourself. I do that with nature. When we were traveling doing these interviews, Karen and I in the van, I would do a few weeks of really intensive interviews, and then we would go to a national park, and I would do some of my editing, and we would sort of go on hikes and embrace that. Music does it for me. Quite honestly, I stopped drinking 2.5 years ago because it was no longer serving me. I found that I was having a drink when I was frustrated, I was having a drink when I would celebrate something, and I thought, oh, wait a minute, this isn't so, I can do better. And so I just quit. And it was better for me, but it was, you need to find those things that you can do for yourself to sustain yourself. Yeah, it's a good question. No, I'm not calling on you. You talked to them. No, what is it, Jim?
I was just going to let you know, this week, he ice fished.
Yeah, that was soothing.
Did you catch? Yeah.
Yes, I did. One little one and one big one. We put it back. I'm not a fisher person, but it was fun to be out there when in Rome. So, what else? Nobody's going to ask where we showered when we lived in a van, really? Turns out you don't have to shower every day, I guess. That's one of the answers. But the other one is we'd stay at campsites that had showers. We would, visit friends that let us come in and use their shower. We constantly made the choice as we were traveling. Like, you can live in these really beautiful places that have no Wi-Fi and no services and no cell coverage, but it's really cheap to stay there, or you can stay in an RV park that has laundry and all, for $70 a night. We would balance that. So we go out on the federal land where you can stay for free for a week, and then we come back in and we'd get cleaned up a little bit. So.
You
you know, the solar bags make great showers.
Yeah, solar bags. We had solar panels on the roof, so we had all the power we needed. We had a heater in there that pulled off of the gas tank, and so we could sleep in it comfortably at 20 below. It was amazing. I miss Vinny. Jim.
Would you share your shrimp boat story?
My what?
See, I've heard it too much.
Oh, the shrimp boat story.
Because I think that also addresses some of that.
Oh, okay, sure. So I don't have the picture right now, but I want to. Have you all seen Forrest Gump, the movie? Yeah, everybody's seen Forrest Gump. You know, the shrimp boats have these pretty little nets that hang off to the side. I'm a visual person, so I wanted to photograph a shrimp boat. So I thought, well, maybe if I interview a shrimp boat captain, I can do that. So I made a couple of phone calls. I'm convinced you can reach anybody in about 3 phone calls if they return them. And so first I called a restaurant down in Louisiana and I said, where do you get your shrimp? And they said, well, Sodexo brings it on a semi-truck every day. I'm like, well, that's not going to help. And I explained what I was trying to do and they said, well, I have a friend who's a lawyer and they're doing a class action lawsuit against BP after the oil spill. And there's a bunch of clients that are shrimp fishermen on that lawsuit. He said, he'll give you a list of names. And I thought, isn't there a thing called attorney-client privilege? But he gave me a list of names. And so the first one I called was Kenny Terrio, who's a Cajun shrimper in Chauvin, Louisiana. And so I explained I'd like to interview him. He said, yeah, come on down. And so I sat with Kenny. And on the one hand, this is a longer version than you thought, Jim. On the one hand, I thought, if I'm trying to talk about peace, why am I talking to a shrimp boat captain? But he started saying, you know, when he was growing up, if somebody in town needed a boat, they'd all get together and they'd build him a boat. And then the next guy needed a boat, they'd all get together and they'd build him a boat. And pretty soon everybody had a boat, and that worked out real good. And I thought, okay, so this idea of making sure everybody has the resources that they need in order to thrive, right, in order to be successful, that definitely squares up with my understanding of peace. And so I got done interviewing Kenny, and he said, where are you staying tonight? And I said, I have no idea. What do you suggest? Because I'm cheap and I'm hopeful. This is before we had the van. And he goes, well, I have a burnt out RV in the backyard if you want to sleep there. I'm like, what? He said, well, lightning hit it and it doesn't go anymore, but it'll keep the rain off you and you can sleep there. I'm like, sure. I have low standards. That's free. I'll do that. And he said, if you want to go out in the morning, we'll go looking for alligators. I said, sounds good. He said, if you can stick around one more day, well, shrimping season starts. I'll take you out on the Gulf. So I not only got to go photograph the shrimp boats, I got to go ride on them, and we went out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and came back at 8 in the morning, and in the process caught 1,200 pounds of shrimp. And I haven't eaten a shrimp since. Yeah.
Did you have a dog with you in the van?
No, well, we had a different dog with us in the van, which died a few months into our trip, which was about the saddest day of our lives. But boy, that dog lived a good dog life for the last 3 months with us all the time. We have since gotten another Cocker Spaniel since we got home, and we named him Road Trip. We're trying to preordain him to be a good traveler. So far, so good. So let's do this. I'll stick around a little bit. I have books back there if anybody's interested in a book. But if you just have questions and you want to talk some more, I want to leave you with 3 thoughts. People always want to know, well, what am I supposed to remember when I go? I don't know. But these 3 things stick with me. And the first is to be willing to listen deeply. You know, just take your time. Don't listen to respond. Listen to learn and understand. I think that can move us a long ways in this world that we're living in now. Second one is to be willing to challenge your expectations. I promise you, every interview I go into, I think, oh, this person's probably going to be like this. But when I listen, it's actually like this. Right? I think I understand the issue or the thing, and turns out there's more I can learn. So listen deeply, challenge your own expectations, and just be willing to stay at the table. Right? We live in a world that's just willing to write people off and walk away. Right? Oh, you're one of them? I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Or you did this thing? Yeah, I'm done with you. When we stay at the table, I think actually we're called to stay at the table. Because when we're engaged and we're in conversation and we're in relationship, there's a hope that we can find some path forward together. But when we walk away from the table, the hope walks away with us. And so the question I'll leave you with is, when things get difficult, will you stay at the table? Thanks for coming.